Science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. And, of course, I'm Al Warren. Who else would it be? Our co-host today is the doctor, Mr. Eric Shapiro.
How you doing, Al?
I'm doing good. I was noticing, I don't know if you wrote about it in your paper, but lately there's this trend about the kids are getting high on rotten meat.
I know nothing. Are you kidding me? I know nothing about that.
No.
It's not my kids because we don't eat meat in our home. So, well, how does that get you high? I can't even imagine.
I'm not sure. Apparently there's you get some sort of a high from eating this rotten meat. And there's actually a guy on YouTube that has a channel that shows you how to prepare it and how to age it for a year without having a ton of, I guess, little creatures all over it or something. He shows you the way. And so all these young kids now are doing it, and they're filming it and putting it on TikTok. That
seems like an extraordinary amount of patience to wait a year. Like there's got to be. I know for a fact there's better ways to get high. There's not. It's pretty low on the list.
I tell you. Well,
yeah.
You know, strange world. Every day I wake up something new.
Yeah.
Well, today we got a great writer on, and so we're glad to have him, Mr. Richard Chizmar. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
I think we're good. Staying away from the meat.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I can grow a magic shroom. It won't take anywhere near a year, I think.
Yeah. You know, I have to wonder where stuff like that comes up because, you know, we hear about things like in your books too, like, but you've got a lot of reality. I know we're going to talk about chasing the boogeyman. There's a lot of reality in that. It always surprises me when things are in real life and they seem to be much weirder than they should be in a fiction story.
When people say that life is, stranger than fiction, yeah, they're not wrong.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the Chasing the Boogeyman reviews right now, and I actually see there are people are like, wait, hold on a second, is this fiction or not? Because it just had that particular impact, which is the highest compliment, right?
Yeah, it is. You know what? I was just talking about that with my son this morning because I read him every time that we run a Facebook ad for the book, or my publisher runs a Facebook ad, it's always fun to read the comments because they just come rapid fire and they're so contrasting. I mean, right next to this is my favorite book of the year and this is the best book I've read in the last 5 years will be, this is the most boring book I've read this year. I did not even finish it. And the big one is I was duped into believing this was real, so I hate it now.
Oh, wow. Oh, so that's not an uncommon.
No, and the thing is I just, you never want to respond. You're just like, thank you for buying it and moving on. But you can't help but feel like, look, it says a novel right on the front cover, and there's a disclaimer right on page 1 that says, hey, this is all because, the author's a whack job and it's from his imagination. So, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like, I don't know, I feel old when I have these feelings. Like, even if I felt duped, I think I'd be excited. I'd be like, oh, it wasn't real. Like, it's part of the fun. So people get, like ridiculously butthurt for no reason.
Well, that's my son who's in his early 20s and will just jump at any opportunity to troll me. Actually, came to my defense this morning. He's like, yeah, he goes, isn't that, what you pay your $20 for is to kind of be taken for a ride? Yeah. It's like a movie or a good book, but. Yeah, I mean, and I wanted to Blair Witch everybody with this book originally. I wanted it to come across as a genuine true crime book. And, I had ideas of planting fake newspaper articles online and having a 1990s era website put, on the internet. So when people Googled it, they would come up with things. But the publisher squashed that idea right away.
Right. What was the reason? They just felt it was too ripe for controversy.
Yeah, and just the legal department, and even doing it the way we did it, I had 3 very extensive phone conversations with Simon and Schuster's legal department, where and a lot of permission forms, just it made them uncomfortable. The fact that I used real newspapers and the photographs, anyone who was in one of these photographs had to sign a release. And I'm like, but I grew up with most of these people. They're fine. They're excited. They're happy. It didn't matter. They're like, no, we got to get it in writing. So, and the fact that I said it in my hometown and my real, the real house that I grew up in, and the neighborhoods and stores. So it just made them uncomfortable. And, again, talking about my son, he said really early on when I told him what I was writing, he thought it was great, but he's like, no, you can't try to pretend it's real, Dad. He's like, it's going to freak people out. And, someone's name might match someone's name, who lived there. And he's like, you'll drive the property values down in Edgewood too. And I'm just, so yeah.
Wait, so is there, and without giving anything away or giving spoilers, is there a moment where it tips and it's like undeniably fiction or not necessarily?
No, there's really not. I mean,
okay. So it's poker face.
I open up, kind of talking about my place in this small suburban town and growing up and my friends. And then I bring us to age 22 when I moved back home after college for 9 months. I was about to get married. And then these murders start, and everything except for the murders up to that point is true. And people ask, did you embellish those childhood memories? Because some of them are pretty wild. And I'm like, no, they felt sacred to me. And plus they were entertaining enough that I didn't feel like I had to. And then even in relation to the murders, I tried to say, hey, how would 22-year-old Rich Chizmar really react? And that's what I wrote. And even when it didn't necessarily, shine a favorable light on me, I tried to be as honest as I could.
Yeah, so very much steeped in reality.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Well, and it's funny too, because if you punch into Google, speaking of that, if you punch in like 1988 Maryland murders, of course they come up. And Alexander Watson is a serial killer from that time and area.
Right.
So you really can lead people in this.
Yeah, and again, if I could have just planted that, sprinkling of articles, it really would have worked. But yeah, I'll stop thinking about that one day.
What is it you hope people take away from it then? Like, what do you like when someone reads it? Is it purely entertainment? You just want to kind of like freak them right out, or is there something more you want out of it?
That's a really good question, and not many people have asked me. It's interesting because when I started this book, it was just such a personal. I've told everyone it was I was always the kid who was walking around with his friends in Edgewood, Maryland, telling scary stories and trying to scare them, and it almost felt like hey, we had a reunion of sorts, and this was the grown-up Rich, telling his version of his grown-up version of the campfire story, about spooky Edgewood. And so there wasn't a lot of, I should pretend like there was, but there wasn't a lot of kind of, deep thought put into that. I just wanted to kind of tell a story set in my hometown. And, what it ended up being without me realizing it was a couple things. One was a love letter to my hometown. And then the second thing was a story about the loss of innocence, not only for me. This was my safe place for 22 years almost. And then, but a loss of innocence for a place and a time being, 1988 small town Maryland. And, how once you do that, it's kind of hard to ever get it back. It's, once the shine's gone. So yeah, I hoped it would be an entertaining book. I hoped it would be a book that maybe said something about what it was like to grow up in a small town in the 80s. And, yeah, but other than that, yeah, no, I tell people I don't think I was really smart enough to kind of put in, more thought into that. Or same thing when people say, oh, it's such a great idea that it's modeled after a true crime book. I'm just like, to me, that's just the way the book needed to be written. So that's why I did it.
Right. Well, but sometimes you look back on a book when you've finished it and it kind of gives something that you want to convey, but you didn't really realize it in the writing of it.
And I think it was what it was like, to grow up in that small town and that loss of innocence. I didn't really worry about the book, I should say, until about a month before it was due to be published. And then all of a sudden I started thinking, I wonder if this, because it's an odd book, it's an odd, concept to make yourself the main character in a book, especially when you're kind of a nobody like me. It's not like I'm Stephen King who wrote himself into the Dark Tower series. That's a little different. So yeah, about a month beforehand, I started thinking, what the heck was what was my plan? Because why do I think people are going to be interested in Rich Chizmar's childhood in Edgewood, Maryland, and these murders? Are they going to be able to relate to something so personal? And then right away, and I mean on day one, when I started seeing the reader reviews pop up, it's like a light bulb went off in my head, because I remember thinking, Rich, of course, this isn't just your story. You wrote a lot of people's story. And that's what I was hearing, is people said, oh my God, I didn't think about popping tar bubbles with my toes on the road. I haven't thought about that in 30 years. But the minute you did it, I was there again. And the same thing with throwing crab apples at cars and climbing trees. And I had people write, and they said they finished that first chapter in tears, because it was their childhood I was writing about. And no one had reminded them of what it was like as effectively as I had. And that's a great, it's a great feeling to have someone tell you that.
So now your characters, in the book, are they all based on real people that you know?
All the friends who I mentioned by name in that opening long chapter are guys I'm still friend with today. So yeah, in that case, yes. And then once we get into the expansion of the story, and my family that I wrote about, my mom and my dad and my brother and my sisters, and yeah, all real people. Fortunately, most of them still with us. My parents have been gone for a while, so it was a treat to write about them in the book. But then you get to the story, it kind of opens up, and the main detective is not someone, several of the town people are made up, although several are also real. And then the big one is kind of my cohort in the story is, this 22-year-old girl. And she's, everyone wants her to be true, a real character, but she was not. She's someone who I made up. And I disappointed a lot of people with that. Carly Albright is her name. And I think a lot of people kind of wanted to hit me up for her number when we were finished. I had to tell you, I made her up. She's kind of a combination of several different, I grew up with 3 older sisters, and my wife's a very strong woman, so she's kind of a combination of a bunch of smart asses I know in real life.
So you're going to continue with the quote-unquote character of Richard Chizmar, right?
I am, for one more book, and that's what I told my editor and my agent. I said, I really want to write a sequel. I feel like the story's not finished, and that was a surprise to me. It came as a surprise. But then I had to tell him, I said, I promise you I'll never write about myself again, because like I said, it's an odd thing. And for a guy like me who definitely prefers to be behind the scenes, I don't get out much. Even when the world's in good shape, I'm not someone who goes to a lot of conventions or, book conferences, those kind of things. So yeah, it was an odd that was an odd phone call when I had to tell my agent, guess what? I finished this book. I didn't tell you I was even writing, and I'm the main character. So I don't want to do that again.
Well, it could have the impact, because the book has been so successful. And I presume what comes next will match it, if not more. So it could have the impact of amplifying you, and then you become an iconic character that they're going to want 6 more.
Yeah, no, hopefully it's successful. That's not going to happen. No, I put the Boogeyman to rest with the next one, and also Richard Chizmar as a character.
Is Chizmar the character around the same age as you are right now, or is it like 10 years ago, or how does that?
In the new book.
The new book.
Yeah. And the new book is going to be, modern day, because with Boogeyman, I went back to, the 22-year-old Chizmar, and that's the meat of the story. But then there's an afterword which brings it to, modern day, in which the Boogeyman is it's not really a spoiler, but the Boogeyman is brought into custody, and then the next book continues on from modern day, and it'll talk about the success of the first book and how it's affected my life. And then I'm caught in the story again, and bad things happen. So you think I learned my lesson.
Wow. So that's kind of badass. So in other words, so the book still carries, and it is you still are maintaining the poker face.
Oh, yeah.
He refers to book 1.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, that's really cool.
So that's, I think, that's the challenge is now from page 1 to kind of let the reader into my intimate life so much so that, it's, the dark part of the story that follows is believable, and I'll have photographs again. I had a bunch of photographs in the first one. We're going to do it again. And, I'll just, I'm going to play it straight for another 300 pages and then be done.
Nice. I'm trying to think of examples. Like you said, Stephen King with The Dark Tower. Another one that comes to mind is, I know Bret Easton Ellis did that with Lunar Park.
Yes.
Which everybody said was a very Stephen King-like among his books.
Right.
But that's all that comes to mind. So it's a very unique thing to do.
Yeah, and again, it's especially unique for a much lesser known writer than those two folks we just talked about. But again, I'd like to say it was this brilliant idea from the start, but no, it's the way the story wanted to be told, and
nice.
So I rolled with it.
So when you're in the first person, so the preponderance of what's happening is fictional,
right,
obviously, but you're in the first person. So like you said with the tar bubbles, you're essentially expressing yourself as you. It's almost like it's you under other circumstances.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you play it. So it's not like when you're there writing in the first person, you're crossing a bridge into some alternate matrix of behavior. Like it's still Richard Chizmar. It's just that the scenario never happened.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, when I was 22 and I moved back, there was a bunch of home invasions, and the local newspaper called the guy who was doing it the Phantom Fondler, which, at age 22 I thought was hilarious. But then, you put yourself in the place of the women who he was breaking into these homes, and he was at night, and he was caressing women, their hair, their leg, and they would wake up and he would take off. And the entire town, it really did affect the town. I mean, people started buying more deadbolts and floodlights, and there were rumors that people were buying guns and setting traps out because he did this over 30 times and he was never caught. So that's where it came from. Is as a 22-year-old starting my horror publication, moving back home before getting married, I lived through all that, and because I was that guy, I kept waiting for this bad guy to escalate and to do more. And that's kind of where the book Chasing the Boogeyman was my answer to what would happen if he did more, and how would the town react? How would I react?
Right.
So that was kind of what happened. There was a germ of a real thing going on that I took off with, and so I just made it much worse.
Wow, yeah, there should be a term for it because it's almost like not an alter ego, but it's like an alter scenario.
Right.
It's like if the fork had gone the other way.
Yeah, it's almost like alternate history on a very intimate scale because
right.
I'm trying to rewrite World War II or.
Right.
I'm rewriting the reality of this small little town.
And do you feel in the course of doing so, were you like really? Because I'm getting from what you're saying that you're relatively private and low key, but in the course of depicting yourself as this character, did you find you were like opening veins? Like, was it very vulnerable, or was it more focused on the events and the drama external to your psyche?
It depended on the day. I wrote about some things and some memories of my father and a moment that I had one night when I was like 15 after sledding with my friends, and I was left all alone on the hill. And I remember, I just remember having these deep, almost like Kevin Arnold moments from the Wonder Years television series where I heard my inner voice, and it was like, everyone's going to leave. All my friends, we're all going to move away in a couple of years, and our parents are going to pass, and life's going to be different. And so I wrote about some of those moments that I've never really shared with anyone before, other than maybe my wife, and a couple that I've never shared with anyone. So yeah, in some ways it was like opening up that vein, and then in other ways, I referenced my parents have been gone for a while, so they were back for the 4 months that it took me to write the book, and that was wonderful. And the same thing with my childhood friends. We were all together, trading baseball cards and shooting marbles and stuff the way we really had. So in that way, it was just such a joyful experience.
Yeah, it sounds so. From citing the Wonder Years and just talking about these parts of the experience, it sounds like there is a nostalgia to it also.
Big time. Yeah. I mean, one film producer said it's Silence of the Lambs meets the Wonder Years.
That's a good segue to your relationship with King, because as much as he's this horror suspense giant, I don't think any writer has put a lump in my throat as much as he has in terms of just sentimentality or nostalgia or just taking you back. to like wistful yearning of youth. And so is that something the two of you have in common, or am I stretching on that?
No, I think we absolutely do. I think he has better control over that. I think sometimes I go over the line, and he probably kind of wants to pat me on the head and say, all right, Rich, a little bit too nostalgic, a little bit too sentimental, because he knows where to pull his punches, and I'm still learning that, I think. But no, absolutely. And what you said about Steve is, a lot of just, surface readers who don't know, a large body of his work, they just think he's the scary guy. But like you said, I mean, he knows how to find your heart and how to work those strings. And
yeah, and the fact that that you have that skill also just makes me think that it just makes the horrific dimension of it so much stronger, because you're earning the reader's trust and intimacy in another bed of emotions. It's just so it's like if you have more of the lay of the land and you can connect with their heart, then it's like when things get scary, it's that much scarier. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, with Boogeyman, I had a lot of reader comments saying there was so much heart, in this story. I've never read a serial killer story with this much heart. And again, it wasn't part of my master plan, but when you're mixing real life affection for family and friends and a place, with bad things happening, that's liable to happen. So I lucked out in that regard.
Yeah, it sounds like it's who you are. Like there's a warmth, and it's inevitable, especially because you made yourself the main character. So it's coming in through that door also.
Right. That's why I ended up being the main character, because it became apparent very early that I can't fake this one. I can't name this guy someone else and just pretend like he's some other first person narrator. This is me, and I'm not a good enough writer to fake it, so I'm just going to make it me.
Yeah, I wouldn't sell yourself short. It's funny you're saying you're an unknown. It's like you are a New York Times best-selling author. I'm looking at all these things. You have thousands of Amazon reviews, so it seems explosive success. I also know in the quote-unquote horror community, which is not a phrase I always use, you're one of the leading figures with Cemetery Dance, and so I'm curious about that too. So your publishing company, Cemetery Dance, is that still keeping you very busy?
Yeah, I mean, I have a full staff now, so it's okay. It's I'm able to write and do all that, but I'm like a dinosaur in the horror field, because I've been Cemetery Dance has been around for over 30 years, and that's not very common. So yeah, in that regard, yeah, folks kind of know who I am. But when it comes to my own writing, I've been doing it for a long time, and I've had some really solid critical success and all that. But yeah, it wasn't until Gwendy's Button Box with Stephen King, back in, what was I, like 5 years ago, where I kind of became that overnight guy, as a writer.
Well, how did that happen? How did you start working with him?
Right from the time I was the guy I was writing about in Boogeyman, the 22-year-old who started a little magazine when he was still in college, and then just never stopped. I sent him every issue of the magazine, and then I started publishing books, and I sent him every copy of each book we published. And I was just that guy down in Maryland saying, hey, Mr. King, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you. So thank you. And this is my latest. And, periodically asking if you might send me a story for the mag or blah, blah, blah. And he did, 3 years in, he sent me a short story called Chattery Teeth for the magazine. And then maybe 10 years later, we published our first limited edition of a Stephen King book, From a Buick 8. And then, we built this business relationship over the next decade. And then at some point it turned into a friendship, with a lot of emailing and texting. We're both private people. We're both baseball fans. We love our dogs. We love our families. And those are the things we talked about. We very, very rarely talked business. It was always books, movies, family, dogs, baseball. And yeah, we built a friendship. And then at some point, down the road, we were talking about collaborations. We were emailing back and forth and round robin books, like where you have 10 different authors, right? Continue a story. And he mentioned Gwendy's Button Box, and then the next day, I got the email with the attachment, and he's like, do with it, do what you want with it, or something like that. And I wrote him back and said, you want me to finish it? And he's like, if you can. And that was that.
Wow.
Just picked it up and ran with it and prayed that it was, the whole thing, honestly, as cliched as it sounds, I'm being 100% honest. The whole thing is still like a dream that I look back and I'm like, people say, well, how did you write it? What was your thought process? And I said, honestly, I was so terrified in the beginning that I finally just put the pen and pad down and said, just write. And somehow I, like an hour into it, I found myself in Castle Rock, Maine, and I don't remember anything else. It's just, I have no idea how I rose to that occasion, but, I'm very grateful that it happened.
Yeah, eventually you just have to go into your own toolkit, the same one you've always had, and be like, okay, like, it's just like ignore the context of what's going on and just make it happen. Wait, so he had sent you a partial or an incomplete manuscript, and he was seeking completion.
Right. Yeah.
Was he seeking it in the sense of, hey, Rich, I painted myself into a corner here, or I don't know where to take this thing, or my emotional energy is waning, or, hey, Rich, I love you as a writer. I think you're brilliant. Let's rise with the same tide. Like, what was the mentality, or do you not know?
Well, what's funny is I didn't know at the time, and I never even thought of it until we did a joint interview for the audio version of Gwendy's Button Box. And the woman the publicist, very nice lady who did the interview, she asked Steve, she said, so essentially, why Rich? Why did you pick Rich? And I remember I froze because I was like, oh my God, why hadn't I thought of this before? And I was terrified what his answer would be. And he essentially just said, he had just recently finished a short story collection of mine called A Long December. And he said, Rich writes the, small towns and the everyday life and the everyday families and going-ons of Americans. He said he writes that really well and with a really warm touch. And he said, I felt like Wendy's Button Box, if anyone could finish it, he could. So that's how it came about. And, the beginning of that email exchange was me saying, hey, what do you think about round robins? Because I have this idea where I might ask 6 or 7 or 8 different writers to complete a narrative and each one write a little chapter. And he was essentially like, I don't think they usually work, but, collaborations. And then that's how we got to Button Box. He said, I've had this story I've never been able to finish. And, I was like, I'd love to read it, but I just meant read it as a fan. Sometimes that's the cool thing with being friends with Stephen King. Sometimes he'll send you a manuscript really early and you get to read it for everyone else. So yeah, the idea of I'm crazy and I'm a big dreamer, but I've never, ever would dream that big to think, I could write with him. So it was a happy accident.
Wait, so finishing it, does that mean going through Stephen King's parts of the manuscript and tuning them, or does it mean literally taking the torch and like, okay, it stopped here and I'm going to imitate the voice that was already there and take it to the end? Like, what was that like?
It was a little both. I mean, and that's the thing. I never thought about imitating. That was the big thing. I never tried to, because I couldn't, I just had to write as myself, which fortunately is very, I think it comes across as very cinematic and very intimate, like a lot of Steve's work. But yeah, no, and did I rewrite some of him? Yeah. And he rewrote with me, and, especially the ending was a true collaboration. And that was kind of stated early on, hey, you have free reign with me. I have free reign with you. Let's not paint ourselves into a corner idea wise by being too specific. Let's just send it to the other person and let them pick up the ball and run with it. And yeah, it was a dream collaboration, and the fact that it was kind of with my, one of my literary, fathers. It's ridiculous. It's still ridiculous that we're talking right now.
Wow. It sounds great that you answered my next question in terms of it sounded like there was a real intuitive bond. Like it wasn't like, okay, we're going to have pedantic 4-hour meetings and plotter every move. It was more like you're both just emotionally accessing it. And I love hearing that that's how he works, because when I read his writing, I'm like, there is such a spontaneity and energy that was always my guess, that he's on some level he's winging it, which is why it's brilliant.
Oh, on all levels. And I mean, I told him that with with the third book of what's turned into a trilogy that we finished, and it'll be out early next year. But when we wrote Gwendy's Final Task, it was a larger scale. It was a full-length novel as opposed to Button Box, which was a novella. Mm-hmm. So we were writing larger chunks of page counts and sending it back and forth. And he just absolutely no outline, other than just the germ of an idea of what comes next. And it was essentially hold on, because here comes the roller coaster. And it was such a cool experience. And again, I look back at it, I'm like, I have no idea how I did it. It's done, and my name's on there, and that's dream come true stuff.
Wow. It sounds like your work is very emotional. So it's like, when you go too hard on the outlining and the micro planning, it can sort of constrict the emotion. I'm not sure if are you more of an outliner when it's just you, or is it more like just gut level?
I'm not an outliner, but I have outlined parts of my last two projects, even including Chasing the Boogeyman, but only because with Boogeyman, the ideas started coming so fast and furious of things that I wanted to include that I was afraid if I didn't write them down, I would forget them, no matter how significant or important they felt, because I've learned that lesson in the past. You have a dream and you're like, I will never forget that dream because it is brilliant. The time I eat lunch, it's like, it's gone. I'm like, holy hell, I can't remember one part of it. But and what I found is that when I do have an outline, my brain works, messily enough that I don't feel like I have to stick to it, and it doesn't feel like it's gospel. But because I have the structure there, I can write really quickly, which is nice sometimes. But no, with most projects I don't outline, and with Wendy's Final Task with Steve, I didn't outline anything because there was kind of it just didn't feel like it was right, number one, but there was kind of no time to do it. He sent it to me and it's like, oh, it's my 50 pages next. And then I sent it to him and he would just pick up and run with it. And that was fun.
Wow. And getting back to this imitation thing, imitation might not be the right word because it robs some of the poetry of it, but you're blending and matching and sort of like picking up on what the other is doing with economy of phrasing and style and vocabulary. Like you're just intuitively both reaching each other in the middle with what the voice is. Is that how that goes?
Yeah, it's definitely more that. I mean, because people said that, did you try to? And I'm like, no, because if I did, it would have come off as not honest writing, and it probably would have come off, feeling kind of plastic. So, but with that said, did I absolutely seize the opportunity to have goose flesh rise on somebody's forearm because Steve has had that in, like all his books? Absolutely. That was part of the pure joy and fun of it, was to be able to play in his, in his playground and essentially, be part of Stephen King for the writing of the book.
I was going to say Stephen King. I've heard about him a lot lately. Maybe I should pick up one of his books.
Yeah.
Al, is that ringing a bell? Stephen King?
Yeah. I think so. I've heard a little bit of gossip. I don't know. I waste my time on these.
You should. Yeah, they're usually.
You can find them. You can find them at your local gas station pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I hang out at gas stations.
Heard that. Now, 70-plus-year-old Stephen King, and he's just out there still cranking them out. I mean, he's an inspiration, and he's obviously doing it because he loves it. That's the neat thing, I think. It's like he doesn't need any more money in the bank, and he doesn't need any more houses and all that. But he's still there doing it every day because he loves, the process. And that, to me, that's pretty wonderful.
Wow. Yeah. Are there ever any butting of heads or arguments or tense moments? Or
no, with Steve, it's been easy. I mean, I've collaborated with a number of people, including my son, who I talked about. And again, he takes every opportunity to be like, all right, Dad, that might have worked back in the dinosaur days, but these days, that's not how, that's not how electronics work. I've written some films and television stuff with one of my childhood friends, Jonathan Sheck, and we're both very similar personalities, so we butted heads from time to time. But with Steve, number one, I think he knows, there's still that part of me that's like, no matter how tight we are, no matter the fact that I can text him and rag on him when the Red Sox lose, and those kind of things, there's still. He still knows that there's a part of me that's walking around going, wow, you're the guy who wrote Carrie. I always think of the Saturday Night Live.
Right. Yeah. So he's not gonna like BS his way around that or try and make it like force it to be something other than what it is.
And here's the thing, as kind and as generous, as Steve is, and as funny and intelligent and all these other wonderful things I can say, he's still Stephen King. He's still the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So when it comes to writing, if there's something he wants, he's going to tell you. But we've never really had that. He's been the most gentle, generous, collaborator in that regard. And the big thing I key on, and my corny butt, actually texted this to him when we were writing the last book. I was like, this is what a true collaboration should be, because we were both having a blast, and it just felt like it was it felt like it was almost like this challenging chess match where it was like, okay, now I've brought us back to Derry. Let's see what you do with it. We've left Castle Rock and now we're in Derry. Let's see where you go next. And, I've had people say, oh my God, you've got some cojones to do that. And I'm just like, but that's the atmosphere that he set up, was this very freewheeling, creative, stew where it's just like, hey, we both got our hands in the pot. Let's have fun. And that's
I have to ask you too, is it, in terms of his mindset with being self-aware, to some extent he's the 800-pound gorilla. Maybe he sees it that way, maybe he doesn't, but he understands who he is in the context. On some level, is there also an impetus of, Rich, I'm going to hook you into a cash register that's going to explode? You know what I mean? Like just, it's inevitably going to sell tons of copies. So was that sentiment ever expressed on any level, or it's more like we're just going to go have fun?
No, it's much smaller scale. Just we're going to have fun. And to kind of put a highlight on that, when we wrote Gwendy's Button Box, there was no discussion of what length it would be, what we were going to do with it. I remember when we were finished, we kept sending the manuscript back and forth, and because it was a pre-existing story, at the top of the first page it said Gwendy's Button Box by Stephen King. I refused to add my name to it, and it wasn't until the last section came back to me that Steve added, and Richard Chizmar to the byline. And I remember seeing that and just having a big smile on my face. And when we were finished, when we both decided, okay, the story's done, we kind of looked at each other and said, what next? Because we never discussed what we were going to do with it. And if he would have said, Rich, let's just put it in a drawer, I promise you I would have been just as happy because of the experience.
It's a fantasy, yeah.
Yeah, but then we kind of said, what do you want to do with it? And I had published a book of his called Blockade Billy. And it was a short little book, and it was a kind of an oddity, and it was illustrated, and we had a lot of fun with it. And that's kind of how we decided. We said, well, why don't we publish, Gwendy's Button Box the same, model it after Blockade Billy. And, we published it, and I'm telling you, I had we sold a ton of copies and all that, but I never even thought about bestseller lists or any of those things. And I was in a 7-Eleven, and I looked at Below the Fold on a USA Today, and it had the top 5 selling books in the country that week. And Gwendy's Button Box was number 5, and I almost lost it and met the floor.
How could you not? Yeah.
But yeah, that kind of puts it in perspective. Is from both of us. I don't think, you're right. He has to be very aware that okay, I am going to be pulling Rich by the back of his T-shirt into another existence here as far as books sold and all those things. But it just, we never really thought about it, talked about it, and it was just this big happy surprise that then turned into more. So again,
wow.
I mean,
has it crossed over into a positive effect on you putting out solo work?
For sure.
Commercially,
yeah. I mean, I think with Chasing the Boogeyman, everything from probably the amount of the advance to how much support the publisher put behind it, to the fact that they could say I was a New York Times bestselling author on the front, dust jacket, all of that had to play into effect. And that's when Boogeyman actually debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. I sent a screenshot to Steve and I said, you're probably more responsible for this than I am. So thank you. And of course he wrote back, and that's bullshit.
Oh my.
But again, it changes things.
Yeah. Before we move on from the King topic, who is co-written with him? It's his sons. It's Peter Straub, and it's you. Is there anybody else?
Stuart Onan, who wrote the baseball book with Steve, and he wrote one novella called A Face in the Crowd, which is only available on ebook and audio. But that's it. I mean, it's definitely a small group of people. So.
You can count them on one hand, and 2 of them are his blood.
Right.
So that's a not only a colossal honor, but a huge testament to how talented you are. I mean, you're in there sparring with Muhammad Ali, so. Somehow.
Yeah,
but you have to also look at it. Doesn't it make you, in a sense, vulnerable? Because when you're writing something with him, isn't everybody that is going to read it going to compare you to him?
Oh yeah. So, I mean, in every way. I mean, again, those Facebook ads are wonderful because people see, that I've written with Stephen King, and they see, the Stephen King blurb on the front of Chasing the Boogeyman. So somehow, half of the comments on these end up being about politics.
Yeah.
I'm not buying it.
Oh, right.
I'm not buying this book. And then they're like, I used to read everything Steve wrote. I don't read any of it now. And, so yeah, it of course, yeah. And what I was scared of was that, his constant readers would be like, who is this pretender? And blah, blah, blah. And of course you're going to get some of that no matter what. Other than having fun reading those aloud to my family, I don't sweat them. I'm like, hey, as long as you bought the book, I'm appreciative. And, every once in a while I might be like, that was really mean. But I'm still saying it with a smile because that's just my personality. And I'm like,
hunt them down and kill them.
Yeah. Or like, it's like, my God, they want to hunt me down and kill me because they didn't like it. But that's America.
Yeah, but I also have to wonder, because you say that you're a very private person and you're not really into the, all of the conventions and all this wild stuff. But doesn't that, in a sense, like when you're sharing so much of yourself and listing it as yourself, because like when we write books, we can have ourselves in the character or parts of what we think and do and how we behave, but it doesn't list us as me, Right. So when you list it as, here's Richard Chizmar, and then you're talking about your feelings and what you like and don't like and things that have affected you emotionally, doesn't that sort of, that takes a certain amount of courage, I think, to put that out to where thousands and thousands of people are going to read it, and it makes you kind of vulnerable in a way.
Yeah, and again, I wish I need to be more self-aware about these things because, again, I just, there was the acknowledgement of the fact that, hey, this is weird. And like I said, all my friends were thrilled to have me talk about that. My wife did not. She's very much behind the scenes extremely, and she was the only one who wasn't thrilled, but, she let me run with it. But it was my agent, Kristen Nilsson, who was wonderful. And she said early on, once the book was published and looked like it was going to be a success, she kind of just said, Rich, I'm so happy for you because this was a really brave decision, for you to run with this and essentially lay yourself out there for a lot of people. And I remember a conversation I had with my son. I said, when he was worried about, again, the Blair Witch aspect of it, and I was like, Billy, we don't know whether 50 people are going to read this or 500 or how many. I said, so I'm not worried about it. But yeah, you're exactly right. Looking back on it, talking about my dad the way I did, in ways of watching him get ready for work and kind of having the understanding dawning on me that this is how you take care of your family, and just some of those intimate moments that are crucial as far as, making me the person I am today. You're vulnerable because somebody could read that and be like, this guy's full of it, or that's ridiculous, or whatever. But again, you just kind of have to have faith that the story you're telling is important enough to myself to lay it out there.
Are you going to be the next Jack Reacher in book 2?
No, but it is funny because I was walking the dogs with my wife and oldest son. My youngest is away at college at UVA. And so the three of us were walking the dogs, and they were poking fun of me about being out of shape or something. I said, well, not in the next book. I'm running 6 foot, I'm going to set several scenes on this trail as I'm running my 6 minute miles. And they just cracked up. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be a damn superhero.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be me. It's going to be me modern day with all of my faults. So,
well, looking back on things, what would you change?
Regarding the book or life?
Well, they've had it with you. It's probably very intertwined, right?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't change anything. I mean, maybe I would have been I was a very type A person, coming up. I was an athlete, and so I was just used to just bulldozing through things instead of sometimes taking a step back and kind of giving it thought. And I think I was a slow learner in that way. I tell people my business succeeded despite me, not because of me, because I made so many mistakes, but I had a really good work ethic and just such a passion for what I was doing. So it just feels like I always chose to do it the hard way. So, I look back at those kind of things and I'm like, yeah, I would have made life on people around me a little easier. But you know what? I had cancer when I was 29 and it came back when I was 30, and I kind of learned some lessons there. And, obviously not enough, because I do feel like it was probably when I hit 40 that I kind of just slowed down and let things come to me more. But I wouldn't change a thing. I'm one of those people who wakes up grateful every day and kind of just goes from there.
Wow. Rich, what sort of cancer did you have?
It started as testicular when I was 29, and then they removed one, and they did a lymph node dissection, so I have a cool scar that looks like a shark bite in my torso. And they told me it's never coming back. 99%. You were the most durable. Wow. And then 6 months later, it was in both lungs, my liver, my lymph nodes, and my stomach.
So that's gone back 25 years ago.
Yeah. And they. At that point, they told me it's 50-50, and I remember telling them, well, you're just telling me that so I'll fight, because it's not all these places, and the tumor in my stomach was the size of a fist, and I'm like, it's not 50-50, but I got lucky. I had 12 weeks of chemo and came out, a good, a fixed man, and all these.
Were you married with children at that point?
I didn't have children. As a matter of fact, they told me I was married to the same woman, to poor Kara, and but that was one of the after effects of all the chemo, because they blasted me. They said, "You're young, you're in good shape. We're going to hit you as hard as you can hit someone with this chemo." Yeah. And I did 4 courses of a week in the hospital and 2 weeks outpatient. And they said, "You're not going, you're probably not going to be able to have kids naturally. So do the old sperm bank thing." And that was the thing. We conceived both of our sons, naturally. And I still remember the day my wife said, I'm feeling sick, and and I said, maybe you're pregnant. She got mad at me because that's not funny. You shouldn't be joking about that. And she took a home pregnancy test, and we went to the doctors, and all the nurses, called my oldest son Billy the miracle baby. So again, how can I not wake up every day with the life I've had and just, be grateful and try to pass it on best I can.
Oh, you're not kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, how do you like to interact on social media with fans, or do you have a website? How do you like people to get with you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and I have my own website, richardchizmar.com, and I'm the last guy. I had to be dragged into that like 10 years ago, kicking and screaming, and I ended up loving it because, I reconnected with old teammates from high school and college, and, it's a great way to stay in touch. I sound like an ad, but I just ended up being the most surprised person, on earth, because I'm like, hey, I actually love this. And, it's neat to talk to readers. And I know other writers say it's a nightmare and they have to constantly block people. And I've been lucky. I've blocked maybe a half a dozen people in 10 years. And, one of those was for saying every other day, you must, have pictures of Stephen King in compromising positions, because why else would he write a loser like you? It took like 20 of those comments before I finally was like, you know what, I'm just going to block you. But yeah, I've been fortunate.
Yeah.
Well, we always have those, but overall, it's an amazing tool to communicate with people, and
it is.
I think it's great. It's just, you have to be careful, because there is those weirdos out there, but
Yeah, I absolutely owe a huge debt to social media for chasing the Boogeyman success. They really, word of mouth was a huge factor, and did a ton of giveaways and promotions for it, and we all had fun with it. And yeah, it's been neat to experience.
Well, when you're doing the newer book on this, you're going to be modern times. Are you going to dare to bring in things like the pandemic?
I'm just going to touch on the pandemic. I thought you were going to say, am I going to bring in the social media? And I was going to say, yeah, absolutely, because that's one of the focuses of the second book is just how there is this fascination with evil and bad people. And, the fact that, there can be a serial killer in custody, and you can go on the internet and Google, and he's actually got fan clubs and message boards, devoted to them. So, we're going to explore that kind of thing. But as far as the pandemic, not too much. We definitely touch on it a bit in Gwendy's final task. But in the case of this story, we're kind of hopefully, coming out the other end of it to some extent. So I'll leave that in the background unless something happens in the next few months, God forbid.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things that it might be better to stay away from, in a sense that you don't know really where it's going to go.
Right. Exactly right.
Wow. So what are your projects now? What are people got to look forward to?
The big thing is Gwendy's final task in February. It'll be out in hardcover in February, and then Simon & Schuster is piggybacking on with a trade paperback very quickly. That'll be out in June. And then the trade paperback for Chasing the Boogeyman will be out in July. So hopefully I'll have a nice little presence there, and bookstores come next summer. And then the book I'm currently writing is the sequel, so I'm assuming that'll be out sometime the following year. And hopefully people won't get sick of me.
Oh. Well, I don't think they will, but it's something to look forward to, that's for sure. I mean, definitely. We'll have all this up on our website as well, so people can find you real easy, which I'm sure they can. And I'm definitely going to have to look for the new Stephen King. I'm just not sure if I'm into that sort of romance drama sort of thing. But,
Yeah, look for the covers with the men with their shirts off and the muscular torsos.
That's him.
Yeah.
That's who he is.
Eye.
Oh, okay. I know.
It's always his face. It's always his face on those models. So, and if you guys want an advanced copy of Finals Task, just drop me an email. I'll be happy to send it to you.
We will. Yes. Well, our guest, Richard Chizmar, the future Jack Reacher. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed it.
Get the latest news and opinions from Eric Shapiro from the House of Mystery website in the Shapiro Report.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.